Hi guys, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now I wanted to do a video today on ways that you can reduce your intake of fluoride. Now before I start this video, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying you should decrease your intake of fluoride. That's something you have to research yourself, and you have to come to that decision and make that decision based on the information you find. But if you do decide that you want to decrease your intake of fluoride, I'm going to give you 3 very easy things you can do that should decrease your overall intake of fluoride from your diet. Now it's worth bearing in mind as well before I start that you can ingest fluoride from the air. We can ingest hydrogen fluoride from the air. Fluoride is actually quite a common air pollutant. There's not a lot you can do about that except moving somewhere where there is less air pollution. So I'm going to exclude that from this discussion, and we're just going to look at dietary sources. There are 3 things you can do, and I'm going to take each one in turn, and I'm going to hit the high points with each just to give you an overview of the general science surrounding why the mechanism works for reducing your fluoride. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is tea. Okay, so the first thing you can do is look at tea. Now, tea is a very interesting compound. It has a lot of health benefits, but tea is able, the tea plant, Camellia sinensis plant, is able to bioaccumulate fluoride. Now this is interesting from a nutritional point of view because drinking tea is seen as a healthy endeavour, yet tea also contains, compared with other foods, reasonably high amounts of fluoride. So there's a lot of discussion, and you can watch a lot of videos of people telling you should avoid tea because it contains a lot of fluoride. However, that's not the entire story. The consumption of tea is interesting because not all teas contain the same amount of fluoride, and you can actually reduce your intake of fluoride from tea by selecting particular types of tea. If we actually have a look at teas, different types of tea contain different amounts of fluoride, and there have been a number of studies, some of them have come out quite recently, looking at the different types of tea to see how much fluoride they contain. And if we made a list of all the different types of tea, we would come up with something similar to this. We've got cheap black tea. We've got I'll just call it black tea. We've got expensive black tea. We've got green tea. And we've got white tea. All of those teas are made from tea leaves that come from the Camellia sinensis plant, but they contain different amounts of fluoride. And generally, as we go down the list, the fluoride content decreases. So less fluoride. Oh, fluoride. Okay, sorry about my scribblings. So as we go down the list, there is less fluoride in white tea compared with cheap black tea. Now the reason for this is the way that these teas are made and the leaves from the plant that they're made from. Generally cheap tea, and we can include instant tea as well, like the tea granules that you can add to water to create tea. They tend to be made from older tea leaves, which are considered not to have the same kind of taste as the newer leaves. But the older a leaf gets on the plant, the more chance it has of bioaccumulating fluoride. The plant generally bioaccumulates fluoride naturally, so the longer the leaves have been on the plant, the more fluoride they bioaccumulate. Black tea, particularly cheap black tea, tends to be made from the older leaves that have been on the plant for longer. They tend to be less revered for their taste in tea, so they tend to be put into cheaper teas, and therefore they contain higher amounts of fluoride. Expensive black teas tend to have tasters that go and pick the best leaves. They tend to be the younger leaves, and they therefore tend to have less fluoride in them. Green tea again tends to use the younger leaves of the plant, and white tea is known as a type of tea that generally uses the youngest leaf of the plant, which is why it's a little bit more expensive. So if you consume tea, consuming white tea would considerably, significantly reduce your fluoride intake. If you're going to consume black tea, don't go for a cheap black tea like a value tea or an economy brand. Try and get the most premium brand you can in terms of your black tea, and try and do some research to see what type of leaves that tea has been made from. Certainly there are different qualities of green tea as well. You could buy a cheap green tea. You can buy some quite high-end green teas that are quite expensive, that on the labeling they do state that they come from the youngest leaves of the tea plant. So a little bit of research can actually decrease the fluoride intake that you get from your tea. So that's quite interesting. Another thing you could do is actually you could substitute some of your tea drinking for other drinks. Now the reason people drink tea often is because they enjoy the taste, but some people drink tea because they want the health benefits. So are there any other drinks that you could consume that still give you the health benefits of tea? Well, certainly there are berry teas, and berry teas don't contain the same types of antioxidants as what I call traditional teas, black tea, green tea or white tea, but they do contain high amounts of antioxidants of different kinds. So overall they probably have very similar in comparisons. If you look at take the literature as a whole, they have very similar levels of antioxidants as a whole. Fruit teas tend to have more anthocyanins in them, whereas traditional tea tends to have either condensed tannins, or it has oxidized flavonoids, or it has the original flavonoids if we're talking about white tea and green tea. But those antioxidants differ between all the teas. Green tea has very different antioxidants to black tea. Green tea is known to have high amounts of catechins as their antioxidants. Those are then oxidized in black tea to form the thiorubigens and the theoflavins, and berry teas have high amounts of anthocyanins. But if we take the antioxidant capacity of the tea as a whole, they're actually all very similar. So you could substitute some of your black or green tea or white tea for berry tea. Another drink that you could consume which has high amounts of antioxidants is cocoa. It's a very easy drink to prepare. You just put a spoonful of cocoa powder into a cup, you add your hot water, and then you can add milk to that as well. You stir it. It's almost an instant drink. Again, the antioxidants are very different. They're proanthocyanins in cocoa, and they're actually the same antioxidants in green tea, catechins, but they're linked together as polymers. And that gives it, again, a slightly different antioxidant profile. But overall, the antioxidant potential of cocoa is still very high, and it would be comparable to drinking black tea or green tea. So you could actually substitute with a drink like cocoa. So either changing the type of tea that you drink, or substituting for another type of drink that has high amounts of antioxidants. And you wouldn't have to substitute, you don't have to totally avoid tea, but if you substituted half of your tea for cocoa or berry tea, you would still be taking in the same amount of antioxidants. So you wouldn't be losing that overall health effect that you were getting possibly from the tea. Although it's obviously not possible to state exactly, but generally if we're talking about antioxidants, all of those types of drink have very similar antioxidant potentials, and therefore they can be substituted one for another, and the dietary intake of antioxidants would remain about the same. So there's something you can do in terms of looking at your tea intake. Try and drink a high quality tea that's taken from the youngest leaves, and try and substitute some of your tea for maybe other drinks such as berry teas or even cocoa. Let's have a look at something else that we can look at. Number 2, toothpaste. Now, toothpaste is known to contain, and most people are aware that toothpaste contains fluoride. We're told that fluoride is added to toothpaste because fluoride is required to strengthen the enamel of teeth. I personally think that's controversial. I don't think the scientific literature is clear on this. And one of the reasons I don't think that the scientific literature is clear on this is because it's not actually clear what the mechanism that would be whereby the fluoride in toothpaste would be able to strengthen the enamel. There is some evidence that when you ingest fluoride, the fluoride stays in your oral cavity, and it binds directly to the calcium in your teeth. That's one possibility. But the overall mechanism that's usually explained is that the fluoride has to be in our systems. I mean, we drink fluoridated water. That water goes into our blood, and that is supposed to strengthen the enamel in our teeth. But the mechanism whereby that fluoride would be able to get into our teeth is not clear, and therefore I think this is a little bit controversial. I have done a video that you could, I'll put a link to in the comments box below this video, explaining how I think fluoride might actually be protecting people's teeth. And fluoride is a known antimicrobial agent. If you have fluoride in your water or in your toothpaste or in your tea, that fluoride is going to kill bacteria in your mouth. Bacteria don't like to be exposed to fluoride because it's a poison. It kills the cells, and it's a known antimicrobial agent. So it could be that the fluoride in your toothpaste is actually working topically to kill the bacteria in your mouth. So there are different mechanisms, and this is why I think the science behind this is actually quite controversial. Many of the studies that are done on fluoride and tooth health are done with associations rather than with cause and effect, and therefore there could be other variables involved. Now, it's interesting that there are estimates, and I've seen some estimates in studies that say that up to 25% of the toothpaste that you put in your mouth might actually be ingested by some people. Certainly some of the fluoride in toothpaste does get into our system. One of the reasons that children's toothpaste, very young children's toothpaste, doesn't contain fluoride is because children are so good at swallowing toothpaste, and it would effectively poison them. And if you do go and look at your toothpaste, I'm aware that many of the, particularly in the United Kingdom, many of the toothpastes that are commercially available, they do have a warning on them that says that you need to seek medical advice if you swallow the toothpaste. So it's commonly known that the levels of the sodium fluoride they add to toothpaste are poisonous, and they should only be used for oral use. But unfortunately, we do swallow some. If you use a fluoridated toothpaste, you do swallow some of that fluoride. So the obvious thing to do is to go and buy a toothpaste if you want to decrease your fluoride intake that doesn't contain fluoride. And there are many on the market. I won't name any brands because they're quite widely known. I'm sure people will put comments in the comments box below this video with saying which type they use. I don't really see that for an adult particularly, taking the fluoride out of your toothpaste and using a non-fluoridated toothpaste is going to have any effect on your health or your teeth. There is enough fluoride in the food that we eat. Fluoride is ubiquitous amongst pretty much all foods. It's very highly concentrated in tea and fish, but amongst most other foods, your fluoride is quite ubiquitous. It's universal, so we're never short of fluoride in our diet. If fluoride is an essential element, it's very unlikely that we're going to have a deficiency of fluoride. So adding extra fluoride to your toothpaste would seem excessive to me, particularly as there's fluoride added to a lot of people's drinking water, and like I say, if you drink tea, there's a lot of fluoride in your diet already. So that's another way that you could potentially reduce your intake of fluoride. So we looked at tea, we've looked at toothpaste. Number 3, let's have a look at calcium and magnesium intakes. Now, there's it's one thing that's worth pointing out, and this is often not highlighted when people talk about fluoride, is that the fluoride that you have in your food is not necessarily going to be absorbed. There are many factors in your gastrointestinal tract that can stop the absorption of many different minerals. No mineral is really ever absorbed at 100%. There are factors that decrease the absorption of various minerals, and they need to be taken into account when you're estimating your intake. Most studies that look at fluoride, they measure the content in the food, and then they make the assumption that that fluoride, when it's ingested, would get into your system, but that's not necessarily true. And there is a lot of evidence that, and much of this evidence has come from animal studies, but there are also human studies that other minerals will decrease the absorption of fluoride. And two minerals that have been shown to decrease the absorption of fluoride in animals and humans are calcium and magnesium. Now, one of the best studies that I've seen was a very simple study that it administered a certain amount of fluoride to a group of people, and then it gave them 1.3 grams of calcium carbonate. And that amount of calcium carbonate was able to decrease the subsequent blood levels of the subjects by 22%, which is not an insignificant reduction. And that was a reasonably modest amount of calcium. So that's a human study that's been done, but there's been lots of studies done on animals that have given them calcium and shown that it reduces not only calcium absorption from the gut, it also reduces the calcium uptake into bone, and it can also increase calcium. It can decrease the fluoride absorption from the gut. It can decrease the fluoride uptake to bone, and calcium can also increase fluoride excretion. So the more calcium you have in your diet up to a particular point, making sure that you're calcium replete, generally that's going to have a positive effect on your fluoride metabolism. It's going to increase the excretion, it's going to decrease the absorption, and it's going to decrease the amount that you store in your bone. And the same can be said for magnesium, although there's probably less information on magnesium, but certainly there are dog studies, rat studies, mice studies that have been done giving them magnesium, and it does show a very similar trend. And this is not unsurprising. They're both divalent cations. They possibly have particular chemical ways that they would decrease the absorption or increase the excretion of fluoride, and those could be reasonably well described. It does appear that calcium carbonate is particularly good at decreasing the absorption of fluoride. Other forms of calcium, like calcium gluconate, have been tested, and they don't seem to have the same effect. So calcium carbonate seems to be the form of calcium that would decrease fluoride absorption the best. And it's widely available, it's very cheap, so you could, and many people take calcium supplements anyway, so if you do take calcium supplements, staggering them throughout the day and taking them with food may actually decrease the fluoride absorption from that food. So there's something else you can do. You can think about your magnesium, you can optimize your magnesium and calcium intake. And they're two minerals that are actually quite often deficient in people's diets anyway. So there's three things that you could do in order to be able to decrease your fluoride intake. You can look at the tea you drink. Tea does contain high amounts of fluoride, and you could choose a higher quality tea with less fluoride in it, or you could find a substitute drink for some of the tea that you drink. You could substitute a fluoridated toothpaste for a non-fluoridated toothpaste. That's what quite a lot of people already do. It's becoming non-fluoridated toothpaste is becoming quite popular. And you could also optimize your intake of calcium and magnesium. I did mention earlier that fish is another food that contains high amounts of fluoride, and the reason that fish contains high amounts of fluoride is because our oceans tend to contain high amounts of fluoride. There's about 1.5 parts per million of fluoride in the oceans, and therefore sea life tends to accumulate fluoride. The thing about fish is that if you eat fish, certain fish, they tend to have bones in them, and those bones are a source of calcium. So a lot of these foods are actually self-regulating the absorption of the fluoride they contain. For example, tea contains mainly calcium fluoride, which is not really that soluble. Calcium fluoride is the type of fluoride you'd found in naturally fluoridated waters. What they add to water to be able to fluoridate it is usually a different form of fluoride. Often sodium fluoride is found in toothpaste, for example. These are kind of synthetically created fluorides that are easily produced, but they're more soluble. Because they're more soluble, they're more easy for us to absorb. So the calcium fluoride and the fluoride that you find in foods is usually present alongside calcium as well, or it's in the form of calcium fluoride and is not therefore that soluble. and therefore, foods tend to be kind of self-regulating on the amount of fluoride you can absorb from them, whereas it tends to be that you're very good at absorbing these synthetic forms of fluoride that are added to things, particularly drinking water and toothpastes, because of the forms that are used. They obviously need the fluoride to be soluble if they're going to add it to the water, because they want it to be able to go into the water. So they pick a form of fluoride that's very soluble. They wouldn't want to put calcium fluoride in, because they wouldn't be able to get the amount in they needed in the water in an easy way. So this is one of the problems, really. And fish does have high levels of fluoride, but if you eat tinned mackerel, for example, there are bones in there. Okay, sardines, for example, have bones in them, and that they contain calcium, and therefore there's some of the fluoride will not be well absorbed. So really, if you're consuming fluoride from your food, unless you're really over consuming tea, and it's a really cheap form of tea, like there are cases, for example, in China where they drink something called brick tea, which is made from the very oldest leaves of tea plant, and there are cases of skeletal fluorosis that occur because people drink large amounts of that type of tea. But in a normal tea drinking person who's eating a mixed diet, and it's very unlikely natural sources of fluoride, even if it's in drinking water, would have much of a detrimental effect. There are many parts of the United Kingdom that have high levels of calcium fluoride in the water, and it may be that they're actually the people that live there are actually protected from consuming too much fluoride, because the authorities can't then fluoridate their water, and the type of fluoride that's in the water naturally is calcium fluoride. It's slightly less soluble, it's not so well absorbed, and so those people who are living in areas of high fluoridated water may actually be protected. And it's worth noting as well that the Japanese eat a lot of fish, and they consume a lot of tea, and they're traditionally some of the healthiest people on this planet. So there are a lot of scare stories about fluoride in food. I would be more worried about the artificial sources of fluoride that are added to our drinking water and things like our toothpaste than I would about the fluoride that you find in food. But if you do want to reduce your fluoride intake, there is some very simple things that you can do. And really, the decision whether you want to, follow those and try and reduce your fluoride intake is up to you. I'm not recommending that that's what you should do, but if you decide, there's 3 things that you can do, and they should all be effective at helping you decrease your fluoride intake. So I hope you found that interesting. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. There are many other videos I've made on different subjects, and I hope you'll find those interesting as well. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And as always, eat well, stay healthy, and protect yourself. And I will see you soon for another video. Take care.